Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. It began with a noise that shook the world. The sky, once serene and familiar, suddenly split wide open, a tear in the heavens that no one saw coming. People went about their day as usual, some rushing to work, others chatting with friends over coffee. Children were laughing, unaware of the strange twist their lives would soon take. But in an instant, everything changed. Out of the rift in the sky came dark shapes, massive and foreboding. At first, people thought it was some kind of military test or a freak weather event. But then the first explosion hit, and reality came crashing down. Cities that once thrived were obliterated, gone in an instant. The world had become unrecognizable, turned into a battlefield where humanity was powerless. The ships, vast and menacing, rained down destruction, their presence a silent reminder of the vast distance between their technology and humanity's. The military mobilized, launching everything they had at the invaders. But each missile was intercepted before it even had a chance to reach its target, and every fighter jet that took off was nothing more than ash before it could even get close. The Earth's defenses crumbled before the relentless power of these alien machines. Hope seemed distant, even impossible. People began to lose faith, but amidst the chaos, a single thought remained. Humans don't give up easily. We never have. No matter the odds, when we're pushed to the edge, we find a way to survive. And that's where Marcus Lane came in. In a small, quiet town in Montana, far from the heart of the destruction, Marcus didn't panic. He didn't run. Instead, he went to work. A retired engineer who had once designed weapons for the military, Marcus had spent years creating things that most people had never even heard of. Weapons so dangerous that the very idea of them had been buried, locked away by those who feared their power. When the alien ships appeared over his town, Marcus didn't hesitate. While the rest of the world scrambled to survive, he got to work. It didn't matter that the world was burning around him. All he needed was time. For 3 days, he tinkered, welded, and tested. The result was a device that looked like it belonged in a junkyard, a ragtag collection of metal, wires, and technology that made little sense. But Marcus knew one thing. This was their chance. The world was on the edge of destruction, but he wasn't about to let Earth go down without a fight. When he turned on the machine, it hummed to life, and in that moment, everything changed. One shot, one pulse of energy, and the first alien ship disappeared without a trace. For the first time, the invaders hesitated. They didn't know what to make of it. They didn't know how to stop it. Marcus grabbed a radio, broadcast a message into the stars, and gave Earth its first chance to fight back. Attack again, and face total annihilation. It was a simple message, but it was enough to make the invaders think twice. And for the first time, humanity had a glimmer of hope. But as the ships retreated into the rift they came from, Marcus knew this wasn't over. The world had won a small battle, but the war was far from finished. The invaders would come again, and next time, they wouldn't be caught off guard. Marcus sat on the old porch of his house, the remnants of the device still sitting in the back of the pickup truck. He wiped the sweat from his brow and took a long, slow breath. The chaos of the last few days had taken its toll on him. The townspeople had gathered around after the alien ships retreated, some of them still too stunned to speak, others whispering about how one man, just one man, had turned the tide. Marcus didn't feel like a hero, though. He didn't feel like anything special. The world was still in ruins, millions dead, and cities turned to ash. A single shot had stopped the aliens, for now. But Marcus knew better. He had seen their power, their ruthlessness, and he knew that fear could only keep them away for so long. They would come back. The war had only just begun. Marcus had always been a man of action, a mind that thrived on problem-solving. But even he had to admit that what had happened here was a fluke, a miracle. The device he had created wasn't a weapon in any traditional sense. It wasn't a missile or a bomb. It was a pulse, a single burst of energy that wiped out the enemy without a single explosion. But there was no way to replicate it, not without knowing how it worked. And Marcus didn't have the answers. He had cobbled it together in desperation, using whatever scraps he could find, relying on old ideas buried deep in military archives that nobody had dared to revisit for years. The world didn't even know about these ideas, much less how to reproduce them. The device had been a desperate shot in the dark. And somehow, it worked. But Marcus knew that luck couldn't carry them through the next attack. The aliens would come back smarter, more prepared, and humanity would be left scrambling to defend itself. 2 days after the alien ships retreated, the world's governments arrived. They came like a storm. Black-suited men with stern faces, helicopters buzzing overhead, and military trucks parked in every available space. There were officials from the United Nations, the United States government, the European Union, and even a few organizations Marcus had never heard of. They all came with one thing in common. They wanted his device. For 2 days, they argued with him, tried to convince him to hand it over, to share the technology. They offered him money, recognition, power. But Marcus wasn't interested. Not in any of it. He had seen the way they worked, the way they'd run from the fight, scrambling to make deals and protect their own power. He had seen their fear. They weren't interested in saving Earth. They were interested in controlling the weapon, using it as a bargaining chip in some global game of chess. Marcus had no time for that. Earth didn't need more politics. It needed a chance to survive. He sat on his porch with his shotgun across his lap, his weathered face a mask of exhaustion and resolve. "You think you scare me?" he said once, staring down a man in a suit who was trying to intimidate him with promises of security. "I've stared down the end of the world, and you think you can scare me?" They didn't know what to make of him. The more they threatened, the more they tried to use their power, the more Marcus remained calm. And when they realized that they couldn't control him, they tried another tactic: force. Quiet, cold, military force. At night, when the town was quiet, the black helicopters returned. Soldiers in dark uniforms moved through the streets, weapons drawn. They came with silencers, no witnesses, no trials, just the intent to take what they wanted. But Marcus had planned for this. The people of his town, the survivors who had watched everything burn, had no intention of bowing to these suits in the middle of the night. The people who had lost everything, who had seen their loved ones perish in the flames, were ready to stand and fight. They were armed not just with weapons, but with something far stronger: determination. The battle that followed was brutal, but it wasn't one that the soldiers expected. The people of the town fought back like cornered animals, every alley a battleground, every rooftop a stronghold. They knew their land, their homes, and they used that knowledge to their advantage. Guerrilla tactics, hit and run. Every time the soldiers thought they had gained ground, they were pushed back, forced to regroup. The world watched, too, as shaky cell phone footage captured the desperate battle. Videos of soldiers running for their lives, of the people of Montana fighting for their survival, began to spread. And Marcus? He stayed calm, watching it all unfold from his porch, the shotgun still resting across his knees. By the end of it, the soldiers were beaten, broken. They didn't have the will to fight. They didn't get the device. They didn't even get a body count. They just left, humiliated, defeated by a group of civilians who had nothing to lose. And the world took notice. Marcus became a legend. He was no longer just an engineer, he was the symbol of Earth's defiance, the man who had stood against the alien invasion and told the rest of the world to go to hell. But as Marcus sat on his porch, watching the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The aliens had only retreated. They hadn't been defeated. He knew that they would come again. And next time, they wouldn't be as easy to scare. In the following weeks, Earth began to rebuild. People were pulling together. Cities that had once been reduced to rubble began to rise again. But there was still fear in the air, thick and heavy, as people wondered what was next. The alien ships had retreated, but they hadn't left for good. They were out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And this time, Earth wouldn't have the element of surprise on its side. Marcus Lane wasn't the kind of man to sit idly by and wait for the worst to happen. He knew the world's leaders would try to use his invention, try to control it. But he also knew that Earth needed more than just one device. It needed a plan. It needed an army of people who were willing to fight. Not just for survival, but for a future. A future that didn't involve begging for mercy from alien invaders. And so, as the world slowly pieced itself together, Marcus began his next task: preparing Earth for the inevitable. He didn't trust the government to do it. He didn't trust anyone who had tried to control the power of his invention. What Earth needed was unity. A united front. He needed to bring the people together, the ones who had fought, the ones who had lost, and the ones who were still ready to stand tall. But as he began to make plans, something unsettling began to happen. The invaders weren't just watching, they were making their move. Their ships had reappeared, much larger and more menacing than before, and this time, they weren't alone. In the distance, Marcus could see them, huge fleets of ships, their dark shadows filling the sky, and beneath them the sound of marching. An army of unknown horrors, creatures the likes of which Earth had never seen. The war had just begun, and humanity was about to face its greatest test yet. And Marcus? He wasn't backing down. He had no intention of letting Earth fall again. It was time to prepare for the real fight, the one that would determine whether humanity would stand or fall. The world was about to face its darkest hour. But Marcus had one simple thought in his mind: we will not surrender. The resistance was about to rise again. The days after the first signs of the invaders' return were a blur for Marcus. The horizon was filled with darkness. The skies, once clear, were now a blanket of shadows, their weight pressing down on the earth like a storm that refused to break. The ships, massive, towering structures, had begun to appear in numbers so great that they seemed to blot out the sun itself. It wasn't just one or two like before. It was a fleet, a whole armada. And beneath those ships, a disturbing new presence began to take shape. The ground began to tremble, and strange, sickly noises filled the air. Marcus could feel it in his bones, the calm before the storm. This time the invaders weren't just sending a warning. They were preparing for full-scale eradication. Earth had barely had time to recover from the first onslaught. The cities had only just started to rebuild, and people were still grappling with the aftermath of what had already been lost. But the invaders weren't waiting for humanity to catch its breath. They were coming back stronger, angrier, and with a new strategy in mind. In Montana, Marcus stood on the porch of his house, watching the sky. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red hue over the world. The sky was streaked with dark clouds, but these weren't the typical clouds that preceded a storm. No, these were the signs of something far more sinister. The ships, more massive and more advanced than before, hovered just beyond the horizon. They were not just attacking from the skies anymore. They were preparing to land, to strike on the ground. The first invasion had been a surprise. It had caught the world off guard. But this time, Humanity wasn't going to be caught unprepared. They couldn't afford to be. The weapons Marcus had developed, he had kept working on them, tweaking them, trying to improve the designs, had given humanity a small chance. But a chance wasn't enough. Humanity needed more. They needed a plan, a strategy that went beyond one man's invention. They needed to become the unstoppable force they had once been. That's where Marcus came in. He had been traveling, meeting with generals, military officials, engineers, and anyone else who could help in the fight. Every corner of the Earth had begun to unite in the face of the coming invasion. But that unity was fragile. Not everyone could put aside their differences. Some governments had become too mired in politics and bureaucracy to act decisively, while others still didn't fully grasp the scale of the threat. But there was one thing Marcus knew. He couldn't wait for them to figure it out. They needed to take action now, or Earth would fall. He had gathered a small team, a ragtag group of soldiers, scientists, engineers, and civilians, all with one goal: to create a weapon that could bring the invaders to their knees. They didn't have Marcus's device, but they had something almost as valuable, a shared purpose. They were going to fight back, together. No more waiting. No more hoping that someone else would save them. The time for passivity was over. The resistance wasn't just about fighting. It was about learning. Humanity had gained something invaluable when Marcus's weapon destroyed that first alien ship. It wasn't just the victory. It was the knowledge that the invaders were vulnerable, that their technology, no matter how advanced, had weaknesses, and that for all their power, they weren't invincible. It was that knowledge that Marcus used to rally the world, to show them that the fight wasn't lost yet. There was still a chance. But the fight wasn't just going to be about technology. It was going to be about unity. Marcus knew that the real battle wasn't just against the invaders. It was against humanity's own divisions. For far too long, the people of Earth had fought among themselves. They'd bickered over resources, over borders, over power, but when faced with the reality of total annihilation, there was no room for division. There was no room for national pride or petty politics. There was only one choice: fight or die. And so, as the weeks passed and the alien fleet loomed closer, Marcus worked tirelessly with his team to prepare Earth for the coming storm. They were working on new weapons, electromagnetic cannons that could bring down alien ships, plasma rifles that could pierce their energy shields, and even rudimentary biological weapons to deal with the invaders' monstrous creatures. But time was running out. The alien ships were getting closer, and soon they would be upon them. They couldn't afford to waste a single moment. At the same time, something far darker was happening on the other side of the galaxy. Inside the alien ships, far beyond Earth's reach, the invaders were preparing as well. Their command center was in turmoil. The humans had proven far more resourceful than they had expected. Their defiance had been noted. They had underestimated Earth's capacity for survival, and that mistake would not be repeated. The alien commander stood before the viewing screen, its fingers twitching as it observed the images of Earth. The humans had fought back. They had taken out one of their most powerful ships, and now they were preparing for the next phase. But the commander wasn't worried. No, the invaders had more than enough firepower to crush Earth. And this time they wouldn't just be facing the humans they had already encountered. No, this time they would bring the full might of their military to bear. And this time they wouldn't make the same mistake. As the commander gave orders to launch the next phase of the attack, a sense of inevitability filled the air. The ships in the skies, the ones that had been waiting just beyond Earth's atmosphere, were ready to strike. The alien forces had been holding back, but now they would unleash their full power. They would show humanity that resistance was futile. Back on Earth, Marcus felt the change in the air. He could sense it. The invaders weren't just going to attack again. They were going to hit harder. They were coming for Earth with everything they had. And this time, they wouldn't stop until humanity had been eradicated. But Marcus wasn't backing down. He couldn't. Not now. Not when Earth's future was hanging by a thread. He knew the next battle would be the hardest. The resistance had grown stronger, but it was still a far cry from the firepower the invaders wielded. The humans might have their weapons, their technology, but the aliens had experience. They had power. They had the upper hand. It would take everything Marcus had, everything he'd fought for, to give humanity even a chance. But he wasn't alone in this fight. He had the resistance, and they had something the invaders would never understand. They had the will to fight, to survive, to win. The countdown had begun. The battle for Earth's survival was about to reach its most dangerous and decisive moment, and Marcus Lane wasn't going to let the invaders take it without one hell of a fight. The stage was set. The next attack was coming, and this time, humanity wasn't going to wait for its fate to be decided. It was going to fight with everything it had left. The world had one final chance to show the invaders that they had underestimated Earth. But would it be enough? Only time would tell. And so, as the first ships began to descend from the sky, the world held its breath. The fight for Earth's future had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back now. The question wasn't whether humanity would survive. It was whether it could learn to stand as one against an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The alien fleet moved with a terrifying precision, a seamless, relentless force that seemed to blot out the sky itself. As they descended, their ships, each one larger and more imposing than the last, cast long, jagged shadows across the Earth's surface. The ground trembled beneath their weight as they hovered just above the cities that had barely begun to rebuild. These ships were not here to negotiate. They were not here for peaceful coexistence. They were here to wipe humanity from existence, to prove that Earth had been nothing more than a temporary obstacle in their quest to dominate the stars. Marcus stood at the front lines, his face grim as he stared up at the ships. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. There was only resolve. The world had already seen what happened when humanity didn't fight back. The destruction, the chaos, the hopelessness that followed the first invasion, it had all led to this moment. But Marcus wasn't going to let the world crumble again. This time, humanity was going to fight, and they were going to do it together. In the months since the first attack, he had built something more than just weapons. He had built a movement. The resistance wasn't just a group of survivors anymore. It was a united front. People from every corner of the globe, from every race, religion, and background, had come together to fight. And despite the odds stacked against them, they were ready to face their doom with a fierce determination. The electromagnetic cannons had been tested, their power refined, their aim perfected. The new plasma rifles could tear through the alien soldiers' shields with deadly efficiency. And Marcus's device, the one that had first given Earth a glimmer of hope, had been replicated in several versions, each more powerful than the last. But weapons alone weren't going to win this war. It would take more than firepower. It would take the will to survive, to stand against the invaders with everything humanity had. The streets were filled with soldiers and civilians alike, all bracing for the attack. The once pristine cities were now a patchwork of barricades, makeshift fortifications, and hastily constructed defenses. Everywhere Marcus looked, he saw people preparing for what could be their final stand. But even in the midst of this chaos, there was an air of unity that hadn't existed before. The fear was there, of course, thick in the air like smoke, but it was tempered by something else. Hope. Marcus had seen how quickly humanity could be torn apart. He had witnessed the government's inability to act in the face of the alien threat, the way the military and the politicians had bickered among themselves while the world burned. But now, there was no time for that. The time for division was over. The alien fleet was here, and Earth would stand together, or it would fall together. The Resistance had been gathering its forces in secret, working behind the scenes to build the weapons, the technology, and the strategies they needed to strike back. Every corner of Earth had contributed, from the small towns to the great cities, from the soldiers to the farmers who had turned their skills to manufacturing explosives and ammunition. Marcus had worked tirelessly with engineers, scientists, and military leaders to create the ultimate plan. The goal was simple: take down the heart of the alien fleet, their command vessel. If they could destroy the command ship, the rest of the fleet would fall like a house of cards. But no one knew exactly how to take on a fleet of ships so technologically advanced. The aliens had already proven that their ships were nearly invincible, impervious to every kind of missile and bomb humanity had at its disposal. But Marcus had one advantage. He knew how to think outside the box. His mind had always been his greatest weapon, and now, more than ever, it was the key to humanity's survival. For weeks, Marcus had led his team of engineers in a race against time. They had modified his original device, expanding it into a network of electromagnetic weapons designed to disrupt the alien ship's shields. They had learned from the first attack, found weaknesses in the alien technology, and developed new strategies to exploit them. It wasn't just about hitting them hard. It was about hitting them where it hurt. As the ships moved closer, Marcus gathered the Resistance leaders in a secret underground bunker. It was a stark, sterile room filled with holographic maps, weapon schematics, and monitors showing live feeds from around the world. The world was watching. Every nation, every citizen waiting for the first strike. "We've got one shot at this," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "If we fail, Earth is done. But we've been given a chance, and I'm not going to waste it. Our priority is to take out their command ship. If we can hit them hard enough, the rest will fall. But we can't afford to wait for them to make the first move. We go in at dawn." The leaders nodded, each one understanding the weight of the decision. The Resistance had been readying for this moment since the first alien ship had retreated. But now, with the full might of the alien fleet on their doorstep, there was no more time for preparation. It was now or never. Outside, the sky darkened as the alien ships drew closer, their forms growing larger and more ominous by the second. The world was holding its breath. The countdown to the final battle had begun. Marcus stood by the window, watching the sky. He could see the faint outlines of the ships, their black silhouettes against the darkening sky. They were here. It wasn't just the size of the fleet that sent a chill down his spine. It was the knowledge that the invaders had been watching Earth. They knew everything about humanity's resistance, knew about the weapons, knew about Marcus's device. But what they didn't understand was the one thing the aliens could never calculate: the will of humanity to survive. The aliens might have the technology, the power, and the numbers, but they didn't have the one thing that made humanity dangerous, the one thing they had underestimated. They didn't understand that when humans are pushed to the edge, they fight back, not just with weapons, but with everything they have. Marcus turned away from the window and walked to the command table. The Resistance leaders were already assembling, gathering their teams and preparing for the final strike. It was going to be a brutal fight, one that would push them to their limits. But Marcus knew this was their only chance. "We hit them first," Marcus said, his voice calm but filled with a fire that burned deep inside him. "We strike hard, we strike fast, and we show them that we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for Earth, for our future, for everything we've ever known." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, one by one, the Resistance leaders nodded. They had no choice but to follow Marcus, to put everything they had into this final stand. The alien fleet had come to destroy them. But humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The preparations were complete. The resistance was ready. As the first ships began to descend into Earth's atmosphere, the world held its breath. The final battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. And Marcus Lane? He stood tall, his mind sharp, his resolve unbroken. He had led them this far, and now, with everything on the line, he would lead them into the fight of their lives. This was it, the moment where humanity would either rise or fall. The enemy was upon them, and Earth would not be destroyed without one hell of a fight. As the first alien ships began to break through Earth's atmosphere, the sky darkened with their arrival. They were no longer just a distant threat. They were right above the cities, their massive forms casting long, foreboding shadows on the land below. Each ship was a massive black monolith of destruction, its surface gleaming with an unnatural sheen that reflected the dying light of the sun. The air was heavy with the sound of engines humming, a low, vibrating pulse that seemed to resonate deep in the bones of anyone who could hear it. The countdown had ended, and the battle was now unavoidable. From the underground bunkers, soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike stood ready. The resistance was in place, spread out in strategic positions across the globe. Their defenses had been set. The electromagnetic cannons, adapted and enhanced with Marcus's earlier designs, were aimed at the skies, ready to unleash their destructive force. The newly forged plasma rifles were lined up, their barrels gleaming in the dim light of the bunkers. Everything had been prepared, each piece of the Resistance's plan falling into place like a meticulously crafted machine. Marcus stood in front of a holographic map of the world, his fingers tracing the edges of the alien ships that hovered above major cities. His mind raced as he reviewed every angle of the plan, every potential outcome. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move, and humanity's future would be lost. "We've only got one shot at this," Marcus said, his voice steady but laced with the weight of the task at hand. "These ships are too powerful for us to outlast. We have to take out their command vessel first. Without their leadership, the rest of the fleet will fall apart. They'll lose their coordination, their drive. But we have to hit them hard and fast before they can fully establish their presence on Earth." The room was silent, every leader and soldier absorbing the gravity of his words. There was no more time for preparation, no more second chances. The alien invaders had come back with a vengeance, and now the world had to fight back with everything it had. "Let's move out," Marcus ordered, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. The leaders nodded, their faces hardening with determination. As the resistance forces mobilized, Marcus stepped outside, the evening air cold against his skin. The distant hum of the alien ships vibrated through the ground, a constant reminder of the threat looming overhead. The stars had all but vanished beneath the darkened mass of the alien fleet. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the battle would begin in earnest. The first wave of resistance forces was already in position, ready to deploy the electromagnetic cannons. Their aim was to disrupt the alien ships' shields, weaken them enough to allow the plasma rifles to make a direct hit. It wasn't a perfect plan. There were no guarantees. The aliens had demonstrated incredible resilience before. But the human race had nothing left to lose. Around the world, the Resistance's forces held their breath. The cities were eerily quiet as everyone waited for the first signs of the alien assault. The last few hours had been a blur of final preparations, briefings, and last-minute adjustments. Now the world could only watch and wait for the first move from the invaders. Then, the first shots rang out. The sky lit up with bursts of energy as the electromagnetic cannons fired. Each blast was aimed at the nearest alien ship, hoping to disrupt its shielding long enough for the plasma rifles to strike. The cannons hummed with power as they unleashed wave after wave of electromagnetic pulses, but the alien ships absorbed most of the energy. It was working, but not as well as they had hoped. The shields flickered, but they didn't fall. The invaders' technology was still far beyond anything humanity had. "We need to get closer!" shouted one of the commanders over the comms. "The shields aren't going down enough. We need more firepower." Marcus stood still, his eyes fixed on the distant alien fleet. His mind was racing. The electromagnetic cannons were holding their ground, but it wasn't enough. They needed a way to break through, to disrupt the command ship's control over the entire fleet. The first wave had already been launched, but the battle was far from over. He turned to one of his engineers, a young woman named Lila, who had been working tirelessly on the device that had first given them hope. "We need to modify the pulse, make it more focused, concentrate the energy on the command ship. It's the only way to take them out." Lila nodded quickly, already pulling up schematics on a nearby screen. "We can do it. It'll take a few minutes to recalibrate, but I can adjust the frequency. It'll give us a direct hit on the command vessel." The seconds ticked by like hours. Marcus knew they didn't have much time. The alien ships were descending rapidly, their massive forms filling the sky. A deep, resonant hum filled the air as the invaders activated their weapons, preparing to strike. The first beams of energy began to flash down toward Earth, tearing through the air with an intensity that made the ground shudder beneath Marcus's feet. "Prepare to return fire!" Marcus barked, turning to the others. "This is it! We need to focus everything on that command ship. No more hesitation!" The resistance forces fired back, their plasma rifles launching bursts of energy at the descending ships. Some hit their targets, but the alien shields absorbed the blasts, leaving the ships unscathed. The battle was beginning in full force, and the humans were fighting tooth and nail, determined not to give up. But Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The aliens had underestimated them once, but this time they were ready to show the invaders what humanity was truly capable of. A low, menacing rumble echoed in the distance. Marcus turned his gaze toward the horizon, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The command ship, now fully visible, was descending at an alarming rate. It was a behemoth, dwarfing the other ships, its massive hull covered in thick armor that reflected the faint light of the distant explosions. The sheer size of the vessel was enough to take your breath away. The ship's dark surface seemed to absorb the light around it, making it appear almost like a black hole, pulling in everything around it. But the humans didn't back down. Despite the overwhelming odds, the resistance held its ground, firing everything they had at the ships. The electromagnetic cannons surged with energy, sending powerful pulses into the alien fleet. The plasma rifles continued to fire, cutting through the air with deadly precision. The ground trembled as the fight intensified. And then, just as it seemed like all hope was lost, Lila's voice crackled through the comms. "We're ready, adjusting the pulse now." "Do it," Marcus commanded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was their final chance. A sharp, electric crackle filled the air as the recalibrated device activated. The pulse shot through the air like a streak of lightning, heading straight for the command ship. The sky seemed to tear open as the energy collided with the alien vessel. The ship shuddered, its shields flickering violently. For a brief moment, the world went still as the invaders' command vessel struggled to maintain its integrity. Then, with a deafening roar, the command ship exploded. It wasn't just a normal explosion. The ship disintegrated in a brilliant burst of light, pieces of debris scattering in all directions. For a split second, the Earth seemed to hold its breath, and then the rest of the alien fleet responded. The moment of victory was short-lived. The aliens were far from finished. The battle was far from over. And in that moment, Marcus realized something that sent a chill through his spine. The invaders were learning. They weren't just going to fight. They were adapting. The fight had only just begun. The explosion of the command ship sent shockwaves through the air, the force of the blast rattling windows and shaking the ground beneath Marcus's feet. For a brief moment, there was a sense of triumph. Humanity had struck a decisive blow. The massive alien vessel, once the heart of the invaders' fleet, had been torn apart, its pieces scattering across the heavens like debris from a shattered dream. But the victory was fleeting. As the dust settled, Marcus's heart sank. The rest of the alien fleet didn't retreat. They didn't scatter in fear like the first wave had. Instead, they adapted. The ships shifted formation, and a deep, menacing hum filled the air. Something was changing. The alien forces had been knocked back, but not broken. Their command structure had been decimated, yes, but there was something far more dangerous about the new movement they were making. The remaining ships began to glow, their engines pulsing with energy as they activated something new. A rippling energy field spread from the ships, like a net expanding outward, disrupting the electromagnetic pulses that had so effectively crippled them before. The resistance weapons began to malfunction. The once powerful plasma rifles sputtered and died. The electromagnetic cannons faltered, their once mighty blasts failing to reach their targets. "They've adapted," Marcus said under his breath, his voice thick with realization. "They've figured out how to counter our weapons." The alien ships hovered above, now protected by an energy shield even stronger than before. They were learning at an alarming rate, and it was clear that this was no ordinary invasion. The aliens weren't just fighting for control. They were evolving, adjusting, and learning from every encounter. And every moment they spent on Earth made them stronger. The resistance forces fired everything they had, but each shot seemed to vanish into the air, absorbed by the alien ship's new defenses. The ground quaked again as the invaders launched a new wave of attacks. Beams of concentrated energy tore through the landscape, gouging craters into the earth, vaporizing entire blocks of cities, and reducing military installations to nothing but smoldering ruins. Humanity's defenses were crumbling, piece by piece, and the Resistance's last hope, Marcus's team, was quickly losing ground. In the underground command center, Marcus watched as the situation worsened. His fingers clenched into fists. He had to think. He had to find a way to stop this, before it was too late. They had done everything they could to prepare, everything they had been taught to fight back with. And yet, the aliens were always one step ahead. But then, something clicked. A new idea, a new possibility, sparked in his mind. It was crazy. It was dangerous. But it was the only chance they had left. "Get me a direct line to the remaining forces," Marcus barked to the comms officer. "I've got a plan." Minutes later, the resistance leaders were gathered around the central table, their faces grim as they stared at the deteriorating situation on the holographic map. Marcus's heart raced, but his mind was clear. "Their shields are too strong," he said. "We can't get through them with our current weapons, but there's a way. One final, desperate move. If we can get close enough to one of the ships, we can use the last of our experimental devices. It's risky, but it's our only shot." One of the commanders, a grizzled veteran named General Teague, looked skeptical. "And what if it doesn't work? What if it gets us killed?" "We don't have time to worry about that," Marcus replied sharply. "The alien fleet is too powerful. If we don't take the chance now, we'll lose everything. This is it. This is the last move." The resistance forces, though battered and disorganized, rallied once more. They were ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant certain death. Marcus led a small group of soldiers and engineers to the last remaining working transport ship. one of the few that hadn't been destroyed in the initial bombardment. The ship was heavily modified, its hull reinforced to withstand enemy fire as best it could. The plan was simple. Get as close as possible to the largest of the alien ships, deploy the device, and hope it worked. There was no backup. There was no retreat. As the transport ship lifted off, Marcus stood at the helm, watching the world below. The once proud cities, now reduced to ruins, were barely recognizable. The alien ships above, still glowing with a terrifying energy, loomed like giants in the sky. The battle had stretched on for hours, but now it felt like the last breath before the inevitable. This was their final gamble. "We're moving fast," one of the engineers said as he adjusted the controls. "We've got one shot at this. We need to get close enough for the device to work." "I know," Marcus said quietly, his mind still racing through the calculations, through the risks. There were no guarantees. But the aliens had forced their hand. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, and they weren't going to back down now. The transport ship soared toward the alien fleet, dodging the barrage of enemy fire that rained down from above. The ship's hull shuddered under the strain, but it held. Each impact sent ripples through the air, a constant reminder of the peril they were in. The alien ships above seemed to notice their approach, and soon the entire fleet focused its weapons on the small human vessel. "Brace for impact!" the pilot shouted. The ship jerked violently as blasts of energy slammed into it, but the reinforced hull held. Marcus's heart pounded. He could see the massive alien ship up ahead, its energy shields glowing a sickly green. He had only one chance. "Deploy the device!" Marcus yelled. The engineer at the controls quickly initiated the sequence, and the device, an experimental pulse generator, began to hum to life. The plan was simple. Overload the alien ship's shields by concentrating an overwhelming amount of electromagnetic energy into a small area. If it worked, the ship would be left vulnerable for just a moment. That would be their chance to destroy it. The ship trembled as the pulse generator powered up. Marcus gritted his teeth, willing the machine to work. He watched as the alien ship loomed ever closer, the seconds slipping by like sand through an hourglass. The pulse generator hummed louder, and just as the alien ship locked onto their vessel with its devastating weapons, the pulse was released. The air crackled with energy as a massive beam of electromagnetic force shot toward the alien ship, striking its shields with the intensity of 1,000 thunderstorms. For a moment, everything went silent. The alien ship shuddered, its shields flickering erratically. And then, with a deafening crack, the shields collapsed and the ship's massive hull began to burn. "Now!" Marcus shouted. The resistance fighters aboard the ship immediately unleashed everything they had, from rockets to plasma blasts. The alien ship exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave sending a wave of energy that shook the human ship. But the battle wasn't over. The remaining ships began to respond. The fight for humanity's survival had reached its boiling point, and the future of Earth would be decided in the final moments of this battle. Would humanity's resolve be enough to push back the invaders? Or was this just the beginning of another, even greater struggle for survival? The answer was yet to be written, but humanity was not ready to give up. Not yet. Not ever.